Welcome to episode 207 of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. My name is Dave Deacon, and have we got an exciting episode for you. We sat down with one of the most distinctive voices in ag media, and we learned about Ron Hayes' journey from a small town in Kentucky through Kansas and making his ag radio home in Oklahoma. And we even learned why he believes agriculture needs media communicators well into the next generation. And before that, we'll be talking summer crops and cover crops, and you'll be able to find everything that we talk about on the podcast on our website, reddirtagronomy.com. As always, we start with a quick trip around the table for an introduction to the dream team of dirt and everything that grows in it. Let's start with Oklahoma State University Extension Ag Engineer.
That local part, and AM's been around, FM's been here, XM, and everything's, we've got all these social media successes and RFD TV and all of that. But where do you see the future of this regional? Because, you know, I get the update from Josh, and that tells me what my corn's doing in this part of the world.
Dr. Randy Taylor. Across from him, we find Oklahoma State University Extension Cropping System Specialist.
The general public, non-ag people, non-rural people have gotten increasingly interested in agriculture. So how do you use medias like this to educate them, inform them, talk to them about things that are going on here? Because the only thing they hear is things that are on like Netflix.
Dr. Josh Lofton. And catty corner from him, we find Oklahoma State University Extension Precision Nutrient Management Specialist, and now the holder of the longest title on the podcast.
We look at our students, or 20-somethings right now, who don't even turn on the AM, FM. You know, how do you see that in the future? And are you, I know you have impact or interaction with FFA and things like that. So is there, you know, kind of a pointed effort, at least on the broadcast side, to reach that next generation, the 20-somethings that just, you know, you ask them what AM is and they think it's the morning, and so is there kind of a concerted effort?
Dr. Brian Arnell. The doctors really do enjoy hearing from you and answering your questions, so if you have one about soil or crop production, jump on over to reddirtagronomy.com and leave your question there, or send us an email directly, podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, and we will discuss your question on a future podcast. So let's kick things off with an update on crops across Oklahoma. And with that, we hear from Oklahoma State University's Dr. Josh Lofton. You are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast.
I mean, we're progressing pretty good. We're starting to see our first corn kind of hit that field mature, and so a lot of corn's coming out. We're talking probably 4 or 5 weeks from maybe getting the combines across them. There's some other corn. We have some corn here in town that'll probably be closer to about 7 weeks. So corn's getting there. I think most of the early planted milos got heads out, indifferent of maturity. So, it's coming along. The dry down's going to be maybe a little slow in these kind of conditions since it's so, high moisture, but that's okay. We're pretty early, within that harvest season. So we got lots of time to have it. Everything looks good. Even the last time we talked up in the Northeast that hadn't gotten any moisture, they got a good splash of water just recently. So, was up in that part of the world end of last week. I think, Brian, I told you it looked significantly better than it should have, given the fact that they haven't had much in the range of water. So yield potential is going to be a little down, but overall everything on the summer crop looks pretty good. I think the one concern I'm hearing from a lot of folks is and I'll throw it over to you, Brian, is the cotton. Yeah. Just some areas just not getting enough heat, to kind of push that cotton crop along enough.
Yeah, at least what I think we've both been seeing out in the high plains, we start getting that western cotton crop. We were a little bit late getting in. Others were earlier, but anything that would have been considered almost on time and not early it's just not rip and roaring yet. It's been so cool out there. They might get a hot day or two, but then they drop back off. And that cotton crop, I think, Josh, you were saying the other day, it really likes that mid to low 90s is where it really wants to live, and they just haven't had a lot of those days. So, while I've got stuff at Fort Cobb, I've got stuff at Panhandle, at Goodwell, and Fort Cobb planted probably within 3 days of each other. Fort Cobb is kind of tall and lanky looking, which I'd rather be a little bit more bushy, but we're talking, 24, 30 inches tall easy. And the OPREC station out there, we're 6, 7 inches tall. It's just not got the heat units to really go yet. So we're kind of seeing how that goes. We're still keeping an eye on it. Josh, one thing that I was going to ask you to talk about is, the big thing that we're hearing all the way through Kansas. I shared some emails with you last night about a guy asking these false chinch bugs, true chinch bugs. And then I saw a post from Missouri about the beetles coming in and starting to strip corn. So I know you're not an entomologist, but you're the closest thing we have right now. So
that's beyond scary to think about that. But I mean, the true and the false chinch bugs are, that's a universal thing. That's a yearly thing. We deal with that to some degree in a yearly basis. Now, most people have false. That's the kind of the statewide. We have some big pockets of some growers that always seem to get true chinch bugs. We haven't quite figured out why, like Grant County, the true chinch bugs love Grant County, but they're always there. The problem is this year is that some of our sorghum got in so late. The sorghum that's heading, that's already gone through heading, it's going to outgrow a lot of those depending on what your threshold or your rate is. But, you're looking maybe some sustainability issues. You're looking at maybe some late season stress, but we've been getting the moisture. They've been growing fast enough that those chinch bugs aren't getting after them as bad as the early stuff. I was at a place yesterday. You're talking about 3 or 4 leaf sorghum. They're completely wiping out fields of that. And even on corn, we talked about the other day that there were some people that said this is a sorghum issue. It's not. They're getting into corn, especially corn that's pre-tassel. Mm-hmm. They're causing some issues in that. We've sprayed in previous years. We've sprayed soybeans for chinch bugs and have had to have some issues. Now, especially the soybeans had a special situation going in after canola. So, but if the threshold's high enough, all of our summer crops can kind of get hit by those chinch bugs.
What's the deal with false versus true? Why is that? Why does it matter, or does it matter? I hear a lot of is it false? Is it true? And does it matter, or is it chinch bugs?
I'm not an entomologist here, but I've always heard the trues are worse, but I don't have anything to back that up. There's back and forth on it, but I've heard folks that have trues that they see they're worse. But at a stressed plant, which is where we're often the most concerned, any sort of sap feeding insect, which these are the piercing and sucking insects, they're going to be detrimental. And it's not where I was yesterday. It's hard to scout, right? Because we have maybe 1 to 2 adults per collar. Mm-hmm. Those are easy to find. But when we got deeper into the collars, we're looking at 10 to 50 nymphs. And so once these adults go away, we'd like to see them go away but we have a bigger population of adolescents or whatever you would call those. They're coming. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those situations where you got really high infestations. You're probably going to be dealing with it for a while because it's only going to get worse as kind of those life cycles go through. So it's an issue. We're continuing to look at it. The reason we were up is we were putting out trials to look at insecticides for control because we don't have really any great options right now. There's some growers that think some concoctions that they have are really good, and we're testing some of those out. We're testing some products that aren't on label to try to see if we can work to get something on label. But once again, this is a yearly issue. This is something we've been dealing with for several years. again, if it's really hot and dry, the sorghum just kind of gets zeroed out and we walk on. We're having to deal with them in a very wet year, which is a unique experience. But they're there and they're an issue.
Last year had bad chinch bugs, but we were in the middle of a drought, and so it was dying anyway. So okay, do you want to save a dying plant or just let it die? And this year we actually have moisture, we have potential, and so there's a lot of conversation.
Yeah, and our thresholds right now are not typically on vegetative. I think somebody was talking that the OSU thresholds and reproductive and talking about number per head and stuff like that. I mean, and most of the time to where we're causing a lot of issues. I mean, the stuff I saw yesterday, we did not even go up to the third collar. I mean, you're talking about base of the plant into the root system, kind of hanging out right there at the soil level, or you're talking about maybe 1 or 2 collars up. And that's kind of where they're congregating. And, when you talk about standability issues and stuff like that, that's the concern, is weakening that base of that plant. And you could see quite a lot of sorghum laying on the ground with a big windstorm by the time harvest comes around. So that's a continual issue. It's not a yield loss, but it's there's a difference between achieved yield and realized yield. That's a realized yield loss, because if you're not able to pick everything up, then that can be an issue. So something that's continuing. I mean, but the bugs are coming on pretty big. I mean, we have more grasshoppers than I would expect in a year like this. Stink bugs, we're starting to see quite a bit of stink bugs coming in on soybean. A lot of worms and caterpillars in about everything. So the bugs are coming. It's an IPM type of year, and I even think some diseases. We'll probably see some diseases because the humidity's up so high. The moisture's been up so high. So this is the year that if you're going to see a disease, this is the year that you're going to see it. So it's just one of those things. It's hot, humid conditions. Kind of everything loves it. Our plants love it. Our crops love it. But so do weeds, insects, and diseases.
So with the elevated temperatures, I mean, they really didn't come on and spike. They kind of grew over time. But are we seeing any toxicity in forages?
You mean like prussic acid and nitrate?
Yeah.
It's a lot of that's really too young to tell. Or me and Brian were talking about that, and right now we're talking about risk. Because it's not realized. It's what's our risk.
Right.
Our risk right now is relatively low, but we're going to be 100 degrees this week. A lot of the moisture's kind of gone out of the forecast, and so we get into 100 degrees. And we don't get rain for 3 or 4 weeks, we could start talking into that again. So it's one of those things. Our risk right now is inherently low, but that does not mean that in 3 or 4 weeks that it's going to be non-existent. So testing is, I think if last year taught us anything, especially on nitrates, it's just test. It's worth the price of admission, if you will, to get a forage test, get a good quality forage test, and do all that, do that due diligence, because, I mean, I think, Brian, you were saying there was a sample that came in from down south that was significantly higher than we would expect.
Calls from our board. The challenge is, and Josh's point on getting the sample is important, is because when we look at prussic acid, or specifically nitrate toxicity, it's not just one variable. We can't say if this happens, you will have it. We're talking about a series of events, a series of variables, and often things you can't control, and they might go unmeasured. So the challenge is that if you gave me 10 fields last year and told me to predict nitrate or not nitrate, I've been wrong 50% of the time at least, and that would have been a win. Just because the fields that were fertilized, I'd expect it to be high, were not. The fields that weren't fertilized, and I thought were going to be good, were hot. And so it goes back to just make sure, kind of like the soil test that we should be getting out in the wheat fields right now, taking that nitrate prussic acid test. Spend a couple bucks, spend the time. It's a lot better than 4 feet up in the air.
Yeah.
Well, and Brian came to me, and I think we were talking about this the other day, is stress is what causes that. We don't know if the chinch bugs can flare up nitrates as well. I mean, that's an inherent stress, and we don't know the answer to that. So it's one of those things that just, yes, test. That's your only good answer right now to those kind of things, is just get out there and do some testing.
So to jump back over to the corn, a couple of years ago, I remember you were doing planting date tests, but it kind of fizzled out because there wasn't any moisture. Are you revisiting that? I mean, since we actually we've had moisture throughout the year so far?
Yeah, so one of our big things is looking into this late planted corn. And so we have a, Taylor, when was that? It was late June, right, when we did that?
The corn out here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a normal planted corn. We have a late June planted corn, and we have a field prep to plant. Unfortunately, like you were saying before, we had a lot of moisture about 3 weeks ago, and we had to do some groundwork ahead of the corn. Well, I mean, these 100-degree days have dried some of that soil out. So yeah, we're still looking at some of those later planted corn. And I mean, our stuff that was planted at the end of June looks amazing. Our stuff planted in April looks amazing.
Right,
so I mean, it's been a good corn year. So. Everything looks pretty good. I mean, the biggest thing is things, I would say from a consistency standpoint, the funny thing is our most inconsistent are typically our double crop. That's probably our most consistent because that's when we were getting rain. So like our herbicides worked a little bit better. Our plant stands look a little bit better. The stuff that was early, we were still kind of coming out of that dry spell. So herbicide coverage was probably a little weaker, so those fields probably look a little weedier and stuff like that. So, but it looks good. We're still looking at that. I don't even want to call it double crop corn because some of it wasn't after wheat, but that later planted corn still is a good option. Still looks really good this year. More often, just like all of our double crops, it depends on when's our first freeze.
Right.
And that's where we're going to get caught or not.
So one last question. I feel like I'm in a press conference. Dr. Lofton, one last question.
We'll take one more before we got to move on here.
You in the red shirt. Yes, sir. Thank you. Are we going to be creeping out of the fertilization window whenever it comes to colder, the cooler nights and the pollination and?
Well, I mean, it all depends.
Yeah.
I mean, the
extension answer. Well, it depends.
I mean, if you want me to predict the weather, I'm going to plead the fifth around here.
Right.
But I mean, our for the most part, most places have been. I mean, that's when we talked about the cotton. That's been the issue. Is that in the high plains we're getting in the 60s at night, and that's an issue for cotton. It's not an issue for corn whatsoever. So, I mean, that's a great thing for corn. So, I mean, even though our wet bulb temperatures have been relatively high, we still, I mean, with the exception of like last week where it was still 100 heat index.
Right.
But, I mean, that was a day. We were cool on either side of it. So, I mean, getting down into the 70s and the low 80s is perfect when you want to go through that pollination. Now, 2 weeks from now, I don't know. Some of that later planted corn.
That's what I was wondering about.
I don't know. But, I mean, we like the later planted stuff because usually August is a lot more favorable for cooler nights than July is. Will that be the case this year? I don't know the answer to that. Yes, we'll catch back up here in a month or so. But, I mean, that's why we like the double crop system is mid-August and early September are typically a lot more favorable for going reproductive in Oklahoma than July is.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that covered all the crop. Well, let's ask cover crops. I mean, let's get them all done. Cover crops. Where are we with those?
I mean, cover crops and summer crops are basically the same thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our cover crops that we planted early really got hooked up the last like 2 or 3 weeks and have really put on a lot of growth. I mean, the stuff that we questioned how well they were doing have really kind of just shaded everything out, look really great. We planted our actual summer ones yesterday, so stay tuned on those. But the cover crops are just crops, so, I mean, the crops are doing good. The cover crops are going to do good. Weed management, I think we talked the last time, the weed management has not nearly been as clean as we have. Because we delayed growth so long and then, just it's been a weedy type year, has not been as strong. But now they're shading out quite a bit of it. And so some of that new growth is not going to be as big of an issue. But, that stuff that was that early summer, late spring, was an issue. But the cover crops look good. If you're grazing it, they probably look really good. Grazing or haying it probably look really nice, ready to go.
See, the thing is, Josh, most of the other podcasts that we record, Josh sits over there and doesn't say anything. But this is his time of year. This is where he shines. This is where he steps up to the bat, and he'll talk for 17 minutes, and then he'll just be quiet for the rest of the podcast, which is good or bad.
Drink my water, and I'll be fine.
So that's kind of where we are with the cover crops, with the summer crops, with everything else. Is it too early to start looking at wheat planting dates? I mean, are we? I know there's still wheat in the lab here that's being analyzed.
There's still wheat in the field that hasn't been cut.
Yeah,
soil sample. So if you need the lime, you have time. Let's walk away.
Ooh, hey, that's a bumper sticker waiting to happen. Right. You need the lime, you have time.
Yeah. Good.
If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Yeah?
I don't think those are on the same terms.
Different things, but still kind of.
It's still a month out before
catchy.
You can do your anhydrous joke, so let's hold that off.
My girls are to the point where they're like, Dad, no, really, that's you're not related to anybody named anhydrous. You're not, you didn't grow up with this person.
They're just now there, but we've been there for about 5 years, so.
The funny thing is, so last year, I will say last year, driving around the state at this point in time, the amount of anhydrous that was going out was really high. That mid to end June or July, there's a lot of anhydrous going out. Driving through yesterday, I didn't see a single person out in the field doing it. So
it's too wet.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Well, I guess we'll switch gears now and introduce our guest. I don't know. Let's have you introduce yourself just real quick. Your world famous phrase that everybody knows you by.
Well, howdy, neighbors.
There you go. Everybody knows that voice. Of course, Ron Hayes of the Radio Oklahoma Network, and or is it the Radio Oklahoma Ag Network?
I guess that's really the second one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You are synonymous with Oklahoma ag broadcasting for decades now. I mean, I can remember.
Old, yeah.
Just drop that one and just kind of slowly walk away.
I'll just say for a long time. How's that? Is that better?
Many moons.
Yes. So, kind of talk about your beginning, because I mean, you're well known across Oklahoma, but this isn't where you started.
That's true. I was born and grew up in the state of Kentucky, and my dad was a VOAG teacher, so we had a small farm. In fact, I guess we actually lived in town when I was born, and by about the fourth or fifth grade, we moved to a small farm. He actually ended his ag teaching career then and started teaching junior high science.
Wow.
Because he wanted to be able to work during the summer.
Yeah.
And ag teachers have to chase kids all summer long to all the various events. And they were doing that then, way back then, Yeah. The pickups were older, but they were still chasing them. And we had a small farm. We grew tobacco.
Oh, wow.
Burley tobacco. And we had some corn. We had hay. Had some hogs, few sheep, and we basically for 4-H and FFA, I showed Duroc hogs.
Wow!
And that was back in the day in the part of the world that we really didn't do the stock shows, like they do out here. We were showing breeding stock, and then trying to sell them there at the fairs and whatnot, and around that part of the world. Central Kentucky, not exactly the mecca for a lot of crop agriculture, except for tobacco, and really not very many hogs by the time I was growing up. Grew up there in Central Kentucky. FFA was a big part of my life at that point. Got bit by the radio bug in junior high and high school. I did a lot of radio listening, DXing, or listening to shortwave, but also a lot to AM radio, and listening to all these radio stations, big 50,000 kilowatt, 50 kilowatt radio stations from WSM in Nashville to WLS and WGN in Chicago, KMOX in St. Louis, and out in this part of the world, really couldn't hear Coma. Coma is the one a lot of kids around here would remember from that era. But all their signal, particularly at the nighttime, went to the West Coast. Mm-hmm. So if you were listening somewhere in California, you could listen to that like a hometown station.
Oh yeah.
But we were hearing some of those that were east of us and north of us that we were growing up. Somewhere along the way, really got interested in maybe trying to combine agriculture and radio as a career. Went to University of Kentucky. Studied. They did not have ag communications. That was the dark ages. In the 70s or early 70s. I graduated high school 70. Ag communications was non-existent, so I went to the dean's office and we talked about it. And counselors one night said, "Well, you could do a topical major."
Oh, okay.
So sure, what do I do? And sign me up. And so they say, well, you take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and all the kind of like a Chinese buffet in the ag school. And then you go over to the journalism school, and you can take 2 or 4 classes there, and we'll give you a degree.
Nice.
So that's what we did. So wrap that up. Took a little bit of stuff in ag econ and agronomy and animal science and all of that. Got out in 74. I was really intrigued with the idea of agricultural radio, farm broadcasting. A couple of famous folks from that part of the world that I've been listening to, and looked around, and there was a advertisement in Broadcasting Magazine, which is kind of the standard for the industry back then. Radio station Wichita, Kansas, were looking for a farm reporter. So I applied. They flew me out here. I looked around, met a guy by the name of Bruce Beheimer. Bruce Beheimer was he had to be 80 by the time I met him. And he had been on the radio at KFH Radio in Wichita, Kansas since 1934.
Wow.
Something like that. He had been the reporter, and what he did, he had actually an office out the Wichita Stockyards. And he would go out every day and report from the Wichita Stockyards, and then read futures markets. They were just really starting to be a thing there by the latter part of his career and whatnot. And then he'd read his commercials and talk a little bit about agricultural news, things going on, working with the extension folks there and all this stuff. And so met him. I doubt I impressed him very much at all. But they did offer me the job. He was mad that they offered me the job because he wanted his son, who was about 45 years old, to take the gig. Who was working with him a little bit, and he was working out at the stockyards. So Bruce kind of left in a huff. But I mean, he was a legend for that part of the world. He had actually started at the Wichita paper in 1919. Wow. I mean, doing the reports for the writing up the reports for livestock at the Wichita Stockyards. And so, he left. They landed with me. We promptly lost what few advertisers we had. Yeah. And the manager said, "Don't worry about it. We're starting over." So I somehow survived that. I'm not quite sure how I did to this day. But by the end of that, and this was a radio station that was like one of the oldest radio stations in Kansas.
Right.
It was like WKY
3 letters
in the days. Yeah. It was a legendary type station that very quickly lost its way during that era because they didn't know what to do. FM was starting to rise slowly but surely. KFH was a big information station back in the day, but they also played music. They started, experimenting. So we had, I think, about 10 different formats over the course of the 3 years I was in Wichita, and somehow we kept it going. And by the time I left there, seemed like we had established a little bit of a following. Yeah. There in Wichita and South Central Kansas, northern Oklahoma as well. Yeah. Got a call from a guy down in Oklahoma City. Said, "Hey, we're going to start an agricultural network." Yeah. It was the folks that owned the Oklahoma News Network, and they had done a little agricultural. In other words, they called it the Agriculture News Network.
Wow.
And this was 1977 when I got the phone call. Yeah. And they said, we got this guy over at Oklahoma Farm Bureau, a guy by the name of Robert Peeler. So some of the folks out there that know Farm Bureau from way back would know Robert. He ended up being in charge of a lot of their institutional things, as far as he was the guy who bought all the trucks and all the other infrastructure type things for the organization, and great guy. And Robert was doing the reports like 2 a day on these radio stations, and they said it's not really very good. We've either got to do this thing, or we're gonna get rid of it.
Right.
So come talk to us. So yeah, sure, I'll talk to him, and it was interesting. And about that same time, we changed general managers, and the guy didn't like me.
Right.
Not very much at all.
Yeah.
But go figure on that one, right? but anyway, he and I didn't really get along very well, so that really kind of made the decision for me, as far as that. Yeah, I've got to see if these guys are serious or not. So put the application in, talked to them several times, and didn't hear from them for a while. But suddenly one day in the fall, hey, we're ready to go.
Yeah.
Come on. So I accepted the job. So late, probably November, maybe the 1st of December, we actually started what we call the Oklahoma AgriNet.
Yep, I remember that.
So a lot of folks will remember that.
Yep.
And literally, you can see this, Dave. You can see the list of radio stations.
Wow.
About 2 or 3 FM stations. The rest of them all AM stations. And that was the stations that were on with Farm Bureau and with the Oklahoma News Network back in the day. And these were all hardwired. They had telephone lines.
Oh my gosh.
That they broadcast over out to these various radio stations. So it was a hardwired network, and very expensive if you wanted to add other stations.
Oh yeah.
So it was not a cheap thing. These were the ones. There were more stations than that were taking their state news product. That was their big product.
Wow.
This was located out of KTOK in Oklahoma City, and they had a big news department and some fabulous people there. So went to work for them. First, like I said, about the 1st of November when I went. I think we went on the 1st of December. We went around the state, said hello to a lot of these radio stations, started talking to a few others as well. So we started our programming daily. Probably 8 or 9 shows a day is what we actually offered initially. Agricultural news, markets 2 or 3 times a day, a livestock market report the middle of the day, all this type of stuff. So it was like, the stuff from 6 o'clock in the morning to about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was doing pretty well all of it. We did keep a relationship with Farm Bureau, and so Robert actually started working kind of for us in a kind of a trade deal, and so whenever I had to go somewhere, he would do some of the stuff for us as well. So that was what we started with. We were able to grow the Oklahoma News Network, Oklahoma AgriNet, from this group of stations. I don't know, was there 15, 18 stations there, something like that. Got up to the low 40s. Within about 5 years, five or 6 years.
Which is pretty substantial for a state this size.
Yeah. And so, we ended up probably 3 or 4 years into all the early 80s. We made the leap to satellite. And so we were then broadcasting our state news newscasts and our agriculture reports on a network that was broadcast via satellite. So we actually had a full-time ability to get to stations with a better quality signal. It was a better, higher fidelity signal, and so we were able to make that switch. That was the analogs. That was the kind of the scratchy record player level, quality type of stuff. 78s, maybe quality of broadcast. Eventually went to digital, higher quality. Along the way, we did a lot of other things that we engaged with folks. I was actually operations manager by that point, and so we were involved in overseeing the news network. We oversaw all the sports properties. At that time, we when I first got there, they had John Brooks and the Sooners. and Jiminy Christmas. So that was the big deal. But along the way, especially as we got onto the satellite, and especially when we got to digital satellite, we had the ability to have multiple channels. And we had the ability to actually pick up quite a few universities along the way. We did pick up Oklahoma State for several years. We picked up Iowa State for whatever reason.
Interesting.
The company had grown enough that they were interested in trying to actually extend the footprint quite a bit. We did Texas A&M for a while. Later picked up Texas Tech. We did New Orleans Saints for a few years. We did the San Antonio Spurs. We just rebroadcast that from San Antonio. Our the mothership. By that point, the owners had changed a couple of times. By that point, we were Clear Channel.
Okay.
And so the mothership for Clear Channel was San Antonio. So they had the Spurs, and so we put that out for the other Texas radio stations. Along the way, we picked up several agricultural networks, including the Voice of Southwest Agriculture, which was VSA radio out of San Angelo, Texas. We picked up a High Plains network that was based out of Lubbock, and that was it was the Ag Producers Radio Network. That was there were a couple of guys out there that had run that. We bought that from them and bought a network out of the Delta called the Yancey Network out of Mississippi, but they were in Mississippi and Louisiana, up and down the Mississippi River, basically. Yeah. So they had Arkansas, West Tennessee, all that stuff that were there. So we were kind of overseeing quite a bit of that stuff, and along the way. We were able to, do quite a few things as far as trying to improve what we were doing with agriculture here in Oklahoma. We did some long-form programs over the years. Probably since, if you go back from then to now, I've probably been heard in Oklahoma right around this year about 100 radio stations.
Yeah.
A lot of these stations, if you looked at this list today, most of them are not even around.
Right.
I mean, there are a few that are there, but McAllister, for example, is still around. But the station in El Reno is now a Mexican station,
right?
A Spanish language station that serves Oklahoma City. The station in Anadarko, KRPT, 850 on the dial.
Yep.
They ended up down in the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex.
Really? Okay.
And I think they ended up being Disney for a lot of years.
Wow.
But they're down there, and along the way, you mentioned that I was kind of synonymous with a lot of ways these days with what agricultural broadcasting is, but there were some legends, just incredible people when I first got here in the 70s. And the people like the guy I replaced in Kansas, you had him, but up north you had a crazy guy called Larry Steckline.
Yep, Larry Steckline.
A lot of our folks would remember Larry, and he was at the time on KFR, KFRM, 550. And I'm not sure if I don't think they identify themselves the same way anymore. They're still doing agricultural programming full time, but in that day they'd identify themselves as KFRM 550 on the dial, Salina, Kansas, broadcasting from Cloud County. And I mean, literally up on the Nebraska state line.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And they would be heard all the way. You could hear them down to Oklahoma City. And you could hear them across about the western two-thirds of Kansas, northern Nebraska, Colorado, a little bit of the Texas Panhandle. And this was the days, in other words, you got all these great little pieces of equipment that you've got today.
Yeah.
The little Zoom and all the digital stuff and everything. This is the day that we were past using reel-to-reels for everything, but we were using carts.
Oh, yeah.
Broadcast carts. And so I had friends that worked for the Steck lines for the family that actually owned the KFRM radio, and they would end up each hour they would stack about 2 stacks of carts, about 20 carts high. They were like 8 tracks.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What they would look like, so 4 tracks or 8 tracks, and so they would have that would be their commercials for each hour. and they literally ended up getting farm housewives from around the region to be their salespeople out in the region. So they would literally, these ladies would go to the local co-op, to the local tractor dealer and whatnot, and sell advertising for let's say in Guyman, Oklahoma, to for KFRM radio, 550 on the AM dial, and then they would write the information up. They would put it in the mail it to Salina.
Oh my gosh!
And so they get it a couple of days later, and then they would record it, put it onto the broadcast cart on the carts, and then obviously at the time it would be played on the radio.
Wow!
And a typical what you call a stop set, which is all the commercials. Between the songs and whatnot, you might have 5 or 6 commercials. One of them might be for Guyman. One of them might be for Wichita. One of them might be for Lamar, Colorado.
Yeah.
One of them might be for Southwest Nebraska. And that's how that was what they did all day. And this was the radio station that made an incredible amount of money back in the days when a typical little radio station out in the sticks might make couple $100,000 a year if they were lucky.
Yeah.
They made a lot of money. They literally, Steckline was larger than life.
Oh yeah.
And we saw some of that down here. Later he left them. He established his own radio network.
Yep.
And had affiliates. At one time he owned the 640 AM dial position in Oklahoma City or Norman. And that was WNAD. He changed it to WWLS?
Oh, okay.
WWLS stands for Walina and Larry Steckline. His wife was was Indian.
And
so she got special loans and everything. That's how he bought a lot of this stuff. And so her name was on everything. And so, but he basically rebranded that station, and and it was obviously an agricultural station. He just, for some reason, they really couldn't make it work as well as it had done up in Kansas. They had some very profitable stations up in Kansas, but so he eventually they sold it, and obviously it became the sports animal eventually.
Yeah.
And I guess today they're still owned by the same people who own the Sports Animal. I think it's ESPN Radio now, but Sports Animal's gone to FM. But along the way, he had other stuff. He bought the big station out in Guyman, KGYN eventually, and I actually had a chance while I was still with Clear Channel. I actually was the quote unquote manager of KGYN.
Wow.
For probably close to 2 years.
Remotely.
Yeah. I had a guy going out there through the week and kind of took care of stuff and sold advertising and everything. But we had quite a bit of agricultural programming on there.
Yeah.
Because they were doing, Clear Channel actually made an agreement with the owner there, a sales agreement. And we did what they call an LMA, a local marketing arrangement. In other words, we operated the radio station. And the whole reason that Clear Channel was interested in it, they wanted to move that big signal, which could be a 50,000 watt signal. It was 10,000 watts at 1210 on the dial. But they wanted to move it to Oklahoma City.
Oh.
And this guy is genius as far as the guy who was pulling all the strings.
Yeah.
It was going to be like a 5-station move to make it all work. But they wanted to basically replace KTOK's signal and put it on this big station there, raise that up to 50,000 watts, and blow it out west.
Oh my gosh!
Put it west of town and blow it across the metro. Because if you ever have lived, anybody who's lived in Oklahoma City, you know that it's really a strange signal at night.
Yeah.
And so there's large parts of Oklahoma City that can't even hear it at night. At 1,000 on the dial. So that was the whole purpose. So while it was sitting out there, it said, Hayes, you want to put some agriculture out there? So that's what we did. We basically we put a lot of agriculture. Eventually, they finally figured out that there was one or two of the pieces of the puzzle that had to happen. They finally figured out they couldn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
So they gave the radio station back to the guy. He ended up selling it to Steckline.
Yeah.
So we were kind of left out without a station there. Over the years, we've had some stations in the Panhandle proper, but these days we actually kind of have surrounded it.
Yeah.
We're on Clayton, New Mexico.
Okay.
We're on Liberal, Kansas, a couple of stations in Liberal,
Yeah.
and we're on Perryton, Texas.
I was actually born in Liberal, Kansas.
And so we're on the AM station there.
Yeah.
1270 on the dial.
KSCB.
And they got a big FM out there that they also own, so they've got us on there too. And the Perryton station's an incredible station. It's an FM station. And, it's just like, we started with all AM stations. Back when I was starting, I was on an AM station, the individual station when I started. Most of our network early on were AM stations. But by the time that by the early 80s, we started seeing these FM stations rise up. We were given the choice of, Ron, what do you think? There's a new station going on in Woodward. And the guy's interested in taking our programming. Now we were on the AM station, 1450 on the dial, 1,000 watts of mighty power, and going maybe 30 miles at the most. And should we move? And is it the bird in hand or is it the one in the bush? Well, we took a chance and we ended up on K101.
K101, yep.
With Doug Williams, who's one of the legends of recent Oklahoma broadcasting. Mm-hmm. And it has been, over the years, the number one station on our radio network.
Wow.
It has more agricultural listeners than any other station in the state of Oklahoma. And then along the way, the same kind of a deal. We didn't have a station at that time in Enid. The guy, Pat Murphy, was the broadcast owner. He was the manager in Enid. And he said, I don't know about your program. I don't think we have enough time on our AM station. We're too busy, 1390 on the dial. But we just put on an FM station, and we're trying some country music on it. We might put you on that, but we got to figure out how to get you on, because we're using some automation. And so we worked with him and tried to figure that out. We ended up going on KNID radio in Enid. And that was a great station for a lot of years while we were at Clear Channel. So there's been some great stories like that around the state. There's some great still AM radio stations that are still a part of our network even today. I've kind of switched hats 2 or 3 times as far as owners, but still been doing the same thing all along. Went from Clear Channel, decided that Clear Channel was, I don't know, they got too big. They merged about 3 times, and they became the world's largest radio broadcaster.
Yeah. And
they just they choked in a lot of ways. It's just too much stuff, and the management and so they did what a lot of the big metropolitan, and they had all the major markets, so they were thinking like that. They didn't really care about the country stuff, and because we were a radio network, we were really dealing with more of the country, right. smaller radio networks and smaller radio stations out in the country. And we saw, and we actually had we went through 2 or 3 downsizings by the time we had gotten to where we had multiple states that we were operating everything out of Oklahoma City. Cooperating, with a lot of our station radio networks that we had bought, but just really saw the handwriting on the wall. If I was going to stay in agriculture reporting, I better find some other place to land, because it was a matter of time. They were paying me too much. They weren't going to keep me. Yeah. I was a liability because of what they were pouring into me on a regular basis. They could do it cheaper. Mm-hmm. And we saw some other great broadcasters around the country kind of facing the same thing at that same time. But along the way, there was a competitor of the Oklahoma AgriNet called Quinstar. And some of you guys may remember a guy by the name of Mike Dane.
Yep.
Mike was a guy who actually had worked for Larry Steckline up in Kansas. And he came down here and they started it. He had a sales guy that established the Quinstar network as a competitor of ours. And they had about half the radio stations, most they could ever come up with and everything. And but Mike was very likable, very personable, and had made a lot of good contacts, and that carried them for a lot of years. And finally, I talked management and say, we got to hire this guy. So I did. And so about late 90s, we hired Mike Dane. He came over to our network and helped us on a lot of our stuff over at Clear Channel. But by 2005, 2006, it was bad. We'd already had to lay off some people, and I said, I don't want to go through that again. So this Quinstar network, in the meantime, had been purchased in part by Channel 9, Griffin Communications, which is Channel 9, Oklahoma City, News on 6 in Tulsa. And so they, the guy that was running the radio network for them was a guy named Tim West. Tim was my manager over at Clear Channel, had retired, came out of retirement to work for Griffin. He said, come on over here. Let's talk about this thing. We're called the Radio Oklahoma Network. You could be Ron on Ron. Okay. How do we get these radio they'll follow you, Ron. No, don't worry. So cut a deal. The Griffin people, actually, I understand that the Griffin people, they actually all their department heads had meetings on a regular basis and talked about and they had the little radio network. They didn't really know what in the world to do with it.
Right.
And so Tim broached the subject with them of, hey, we want to hire Ron Hayes and get serious on the agricultural side. They really build it up. And so I think it was a split vote, but they voted to go ahead and try to let me come in, be hired. So over I went. 2005, 2006, in that time period, went to work for Griffin. We started, immediately went around, saw some of the key radio stations that we needed. Were able to cut deals, got a lot of them moving. We had low 40s. When I left Clear Channel, they had 16 or 17 stations. Within about 2 years, we had 45 radio stations.
Wow.
Clear Channel was down to about 17.
Wow.
So we were very fortunate that we were able to flip that. But that was after I had been on the radio for 30 years.
Right.
And so I think that was there was a lot of trust, I guess, and I appreciate that. I was pretty humbled that we were able to do that so fast. But in the meantime, decided that we were getting more and more information. It seemed like all the time. Just in that era. By that point, things that happened like the internet and email. You had emails, how you communicated with stuff, and cell phones.
Right.
And we had upgraded our equipment several times. We were still on digital satellite, but we were also letting a lot of our radio stations download programs on the internet with an FTP site. And so all that was rolling along, and I've got all this stuff I could talk about every day. And I've got these little short radio programs. I got 3 minutes or 4 minutes of time on the radio, and that's enough for the way I talk. I can introduce myself, and that's about it.
Right.
And so or I get somebody like talk to Brian here, and suddenly I can't do more than 30-second soundbite.
Right.
Or maybe a 45-second if I'm lucky.
Right.
And that's a little bit tough to explain, some of these technical things in agriculture. So I said, we ought to do something. I wonder if I sent some stuff out every day, people would be interested in it. In other words, we set up a little website and everything, and we were starting to try to build it up, but it was amateur hour.
Yeah.
And so we said, well, I think I'm going to do an email. So we sent it out a few days. I sent it to a few key people, some leaders and some friends of ours and everything, and said, "What do you think?" Yeah, keep going.
Yeah.
So we set up the Ron Hayes Daily Farm and Ranch News email, and we've never really advertised it per se. It's kind of grown organically. We've got 5,000 subscribers, about 5,300 now. I think it's the current number. Open rate's about 50%.
Yeah. That's pretty high.
That's unusual.
Very high.
That's very unusual, and so it's a pretty cool thing, and that's allowed us to have, I think, a lot more influence along the way, and that's what that's allowed us to do is that we've been when we go out and do an interview, we go to a field day, or we go to an agricultural meeting or something like that. We can sit down and talk to somebody for 5 or 6 minutes.
Right.
We can say, well, what's going on? We can get, what Josh just described to you guys.
Yeah.
We can do that with somebody and say, hey, let's talk about, what's going on with crops. Let's talk about policy. Let's talk about trade. Yesterday I did an interview with Frank Lucas.
Yeah.
23 minutes later we're done, and we talked about all things Farm Bill and WOTUS and foreign ownership of land and all these kind of things. And so we could take those kind of interviews and we'd save them, and we'd upload them to the internet, and so people could listen to them. And then we sent the email out and had a little short blurb on that about, well, yesterday we talked to Frank Lucas. Click here and you can go see the story and listen to the interview. And so that's how we've built that email over the years.
Yeah.
And so it's all kind of worked together. The it's kind of a three-legged stool now. It's the radio network, which is still very important. That's how we pay the bills,
Right.
really. But we've got some awfully good support with the email as well over the years. We've got some very faithful, tremendous sponsors. It's kind of been interesting to watch that over the years, and it really follows some of the recent developments of agriculture in the state of Oklahoma. From especially 2008, 2009 is when we really started going, and we really got some folks that were sponsoring, and we had enough folks out there watching and reading it every day that it made some difference. But those early days, you guys remember canola, obviously, and the rise of canola. And they're okay canola. There we are.
Yeah.
And so we had the plain PCOM.
Yep.
The cotton oilseed mill down in Oklahoma City. It's now there in basically the edge of Bricktown, and has basically moved, I guess, to Altus. As a shadow of what it was, but at the time, but it was a big deal, and that was a big part of what we did, and we played, we messed around with a little bit of, we had a canola TV for a while that we did on YouTube, but we all that was linked back to our website and to the daily email, and then like I say, we played some shorter sound bites of that on the radio along the way, but we were able to promote everything else on the radio, and so it's all kind of blended together. And so radio has changed a lot over the years, from AM radio only to FM starting to rise up, and then finally FM kind of got even, and now FM dominates. And now you got people like Ford saying, "Well, we're not going to put AM in the TV in their vehicles anymore."
I'm glad they fixed that.
And so we're working on that.
Yeah.
In fact, the National Association of Farm Broadcasters, or Farm Broadcasting, I guess is the proper title, has been big and trying to work with the National Broadcasters Association and trying to push back, and got bills introduced in the House and the Senate to try to fix that, to make sure that AM doesn't go away for not just agriculture, but for so many things out in the country, and for emergency broadcast purposes. It's just it's a safety net for rural America, without a doubt. So, that's been part of the change down through the years. Satellite, you got Sirius with the things, but there's just something about the on-air broadcast of AM and FM, and a lot of all these guys have got apps now. All of them have got, you can listen to any of them on your phone if you want to. So if you want to listen to a radio station up in Iowa, or you want to listen to KFRM without all the scratches, you can listen to them in real time on your phone or on your computer. Same is true on a lot of other stations that we're with on a regular basis. We've been able to have some long-form programming on 690 AM in Coffeyville here the last several years. So we do a half an hour in the morning on them, and
really?
2 half hours in the middle of the day, 11:30 to 12 and 12:30 to 1 every day on KGGF. In Coffeyville.
Yeah.
That's a plug for them today. So, but the mighty 690. But they're good folks, and that gives us a great signal up in northeastern Oklahoma. But we've had great relationships over the years with our RDA stations, and the key is the good ones have learned how to continue to serve their communities.
Yeah.
And the ones that haven't have tried to be jukeboxes, and they've ended up either being just automated shadows of themselves, or the signals get moved to a metro.
We're taking just a quick break so the doctors can practice their best howdy neighbor voice. And I'm here to tell you, Randy's is pretty well spot on. And while they do that, I want to remind you to hit the subscribe button where you get your podcast. And if you want to learn more about what the doctors are talking about, jump on over to reddirtagronomy.com for all of that information and a place to submit questions for them. It's always fun to hear from you guys, and the doctors love hearing your questions. Again, that's reddirtagronomy.com. Let's dive back in with what our guest Ron Hayes sees for the future of agricultural communications. You are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. One thing that's often forgotten is that the AM signal, the FM signals, are there to serve the community, and so that's whenever. And I've said this on a local radio station I'm on every now and again. I say people forget that this is a community service, and those stations that remember that are the successful ones because they build that relationship with the community. Yeah. And in many ways, you've kind of built that relationship with the ag community. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the wonderful thing about agricultural radio is the folks that you get to work with on a regular basis, you interact with, and that's been so valuable as far as professionally, but it's been so rewarding personally, and that's been really key. Knowing Brian over the years, both professionally at OSU, but also he was a part of the Oklahoma Ag Leadership Program here from OSU, and I was very lucky. Early '80s, I was 10 years into, or six or 7 years into the business or less total, and 3 years or so into Oklahoma, and they had some folks. Paul and Dosha Jackson, call a couple old names from way back when, and some others went to the Pacific Northwest and heard a presentation from the Kellogg Foundation about this idea of, we want to start agricultural leadership programs around the United States. We think land grants are a good place to be. What do you think? And so there were land grant representatives from around the country, and they decided that, it sounds interesting. And so OSU said, we're in. And so the first Ag Leadership Program was like 81, 82 for the state of Oklahoma. I applied. I was really very fortunate that I was one of the 3 non-farmers that were a part of that program.
Oh, wow.
6. 24 farmers full-time. They were full-time back in those days. They weren't,
they didn't have a day job.
They didn't have a day job. I don't think. I'll bet not a single one of them had a day job.
Right.
My mom might have had. The wife might have, because they were all men, and they were all full time. And there was like 6 of us. There were a couple of bankers, and I forget who else actually was involved. But Doug Tippins, who's been on the Board of Regents now, was a part of that class. Don Schieber was part of that class.
Wow.
Mike Spradling was part of that class.
Yeah.
And just tremendous. Mason Mungle was a part of that class. He's a long-time lobbyist and Oklahoma Farmers Union. Just incredible folks that we were part of that first class with. So been fortunate as part of that, but then been able to give back and be a part of the advisory board for a lot of years as well.
Ron, you mentioned it. When Clear Channel got too big, and and we see that with businesses and all of society. But that local part, and AM's been around, FM's been here, XM, and everything's. We've got all these social media successes and RFD TV and all of that. But where do you see the future of this regional? Because I get the update from Josh. Mm-hmm. And that tells me what my corn's doing in this part of the world. Nothing against some of the social media sensations, but they're not telling me what corn in maybe they don't care what corn in North Central Oklahoma is doing, but they're certainly not going to tell me how to grow it or that. So how do you see that whole? What's our future here in this area?
Well, that's tough. I mean, I think things like what you guys are doing, that's a very real part of the mix now, and more, because if you can give good information, I mean, what the first 10 minutes of this conversation today, 10, 15 minutes of the conversation that Brian and Josh had, that's valuable. Now, it's not for everybody. I mean, when you figure how many acres of corn and how many acres of soybeans we plant in the state of Oklahoma, we're one county in Iowa, maybe, if we're lucky, or maybe 2 counties. I don't know, but cotton's a little bit more than that. But still, it's a fairly micro-sized slice of the overall pie. We talk about some of those things. We'll do interviews with folks like you guys. And others at OSU, extension's been so valuable, so important to us. I'm grateful that we've been able to have a good relationship with the folks from day one with extension. But going forward, it's harder to have a lot of time on air, even on some of the smaller radio stations, because the population out there in the country that's actually farming and ranching is down quite a bit. So it's important for us to have, I think, still the presence on the radio, because that helps remind folks, not just on the farm, but also helps us educate folks that are our customers, the folks that are eating and wearing the products that we're trying to produce at the end of the day. That helps us tell the story for agriculture. But at the same time, we're particularly when we're on the radio, we're talking to agriculture. We're also talking on behalf of agriculture, and that's something we've always tried to remember down through the years. I think there's still, for a station that is willing to serve that local community, they're gonna make time to have these type of reports. And the conversations that we've had, we've lost some over the years, for sure. But I think the ones that are there, they're pretty committed, and what they look like, it's not going to be a broadcaster that is going to be on a single radio station in Oklahoma City anymore, or Tulsa, or for that matter, even Wichita Falls. One of the great broadcasters from way back when I first got here, a guy by the name of Earl Sargent from KWFT 620 on the dial in Wichita Falls, covered all of southwestern Kansas, or southwestern Oklahoma. And so I mean, if he talked about cotton, everybody listened on that part of the world, and they listened to the folks like Russell Pearson, who was on WKY radio and on Channel 4 in Oklahoma City for years and years as well. So those kind of guys, they were magical. And whether there's going to be people that maybe have got there's still some great personalities out there even today across the country, but for the most part, they're either on big country-based, rural-based radio stations that cover a lot of territory. I think of things like Nebraska, that they actually have got a farm co-op that has got about 4 radio stations that they own. KRVN, 880 on the dial, 50,000 watts. I think it's out of Lexington, Nebraska, is owned by that co-op. Wow. And so they're agriculture. Yeah. They do some other things as well, particularly after you get past markets and everything during the day. But they're not going anywhere. Yeah. They're going to be there. And they've got a couple of other stations, that are in eastern Nebraska, now all the way almost to Colorado as well. And so they've got quite a setup. Something like a KFRM, they're going to be around for a while. Those kind of things. And on further up, a buddy of mine about my same age that was in the same situation with me, a guy by the name of Don Wick, was on WCCO in Minneapolis. Huge 50,000 watt station, owned by CBS in the latter years, and still owned, I think, by them. But they got to the point Minneapolis was too big. They fired Don Wick. He had a huge following. It was a legendary station for agriculture back through the years. Well, Don had to basically go reinvent. He was old. He was young enough at that point. He needed to reinvent what he needed to do. He ended up in eastern North Dakota, set up a radio network, the Red River Radio Network, the Red River of the North, and they're not on a huge number of stations, about 20, but I mean they've got a lot of programming every day, and those stations are dedicated to that. They make money. They serve a lot of agricultural producers over North Dakota, western Minnesota, and that's where the future is. I mean, now Oklahoma, I think our niche seems to be pretty good shape. There's a couple of agricultural networks in our state still. We're the big one, but I think I think because we've been able to branch out and do the extra things that we do some podcasts. We don't do. I don't think we do probably as well as you guys do, but we. The daily email makes a lot of difference. The website, we've been able to modernize it. It was kind of the dark ages for a lot of years. It's finally using the WordPress platform finally and getting it up to speed better and everything. But working those three things together, radio, web, and the daily communication makes a lot of difference.
It really has come a long way from the days of the hardwire transmission to. I mean, nowadays you could send a high quality audio signal via your phone to a radio station remotely if needed, and so and I find that interesting what you talked about, kind of the triple effect there: the radio, the email, the website, and getting the message out multiple ways. But always having that radio signal to remind you to check your email, to go to the website, and balancing it throughout the three.
We try to and we probably don't do as good a job as we should in reminding folks on the radio broadcast about check out our website, subscribe to our email, but we try to do that as well, and then there is social media. We're active on Facebook. I'm active on Twitter. Those are the two that I use.
Are you on Threads yet?
Not this week. No. One of these days, I'm sure. But I've been trying to navigate through Musk and all some of his roadblocks on Twitter. So but anyway, that's I guess maybe the fourth element. But the other thing that's really important as far as it makes a difference for us, and this is something that as I get closer to retirement, I'm kind of half time now, but we've hired a young lady who's been with us for about 3 years now. Casey Shepard is our new. She's actually our farm director. I guess she's my boss, but I still kind of tell her, I kind of wag my finger about stuff. So we got to do this, we got to do that, or whatever. But Casey fits the bill for what makes a difference in agricultural reporting. Is that she's personable, she can interact with people really well. She sings pretty good too.
Oh yeah,
I mean it's goofy. At the OGI, I was unable to make the OGI meeting this spring, and so I said, use Casey, and so Mark Hodges did, and brought her in, and they said on one thing, we want you to sing, and so she emceed, and then she sang. And so, but I mean, she's got wonderful personalities.
I was about to say she's loaded with personality.
She'd done radio interviews with all these country legends and everything over the years. Had worked on our Weatherford station for several years. Went to Texas for a quick time. Went back to Weatherford. Ended up in the Oklahoma City market when we hired her. She was working part time and working with Loves.
Oh, really?
They're corporate people when we hired her, and she looked at the resume, and she showed it to her husband and said, "Did they write this for you?"
Yeah.
I mean, no, and so it really has been a match made in heaven in a lot of ways with the bring Casey, and so proud of her. And she, in fact, today she's up in Minneapolis, board meeting, National Association of Farm Broadcasters. She's a district or a regional vice president right now, and so she's really stepped up. But it's that type of personality that can go out and mix and mingle at meetings, and can build those relationships with. Whether it's a producer, whether it's the extension folks, whether it's the lobbyists that are involved, whoever it is, she's working on doing all that kind of stuff. And that makes a difference because when you can say, and you have those people call you about news stories or say, we want to make sure that you get that in tomorrow's email. Can you help us on that? And so that makes a lot of difference when you have that type of networking that becomes successful.
So I'm going to jump in a little bit here, Dave. So I'm curious, over the years, is there like one or two people you think about that when you know you're going to get a chance to interview them, you got excited or get excited? It's like, Lucas, I'm going to get it. Is there anybody that just jumps out at you? You're like, you just enjoy it and you look forward to the opportunity.
I always enjoy Frank.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a lot of fun. And the thing is, you have to with a politician, you have to kind of run interference because he's got the communications director. He's got another one. He's got a new one. Mm-hmm. And so I had to break the kid in on this particular interview.
Break the kid in. Now listen here.
I'll be in trouble, I'm sure. But anyway, he said, "Well, what do you want to talk about?" So I gave him a laundry list of things, and so he went back and he talked to the staff guy, not the Congressman Lucas, and said. And so they marked off a couple of them. I say, well, okay, that's fine. So, but I get on with the congressman. I just go through my regular list.
Yeah. And you can mark off what you want. I'm still going to do my thing.
but at the end of the day, that it's always a lot of fun, and because Frank Lucas is so unique, he's literally one of about. I don't know if there's 4 or 5 true farmers in the entire Congress or not. Mm-hmm. There's not very many. And nobody understands policy on the Farm Bill side of things more than Frank Lucas. So it's so important for him to be back in the Farm Bill mix this year. So we talked, I talked to him 23 or 24 minutes, and probably 16 minutes of that was Farm Bill, and then we went to some of the things, including a couple of things that the news communications guys wanted me to talk about. So I got those in at the end. So anyway, but that's great. I mean, I got a little giddy probably when had the opportunity to talk with Frank Mitlerner from UC Davis. Mm-hmm. I talked to him once before. My daughter, her husband served out in the Air Force Base out in that area of California for several years. And so one of the times I went to see her, I made the connection and went to Frank Mitlerner's, Dr. Mitlerner's office at UC Davis and talked to him there. And that was when he was he was an up and comer at that point on all this, global warming and greenhouse gases and everything. But he's exploded since then. Was a greenhouse. He's the greenhouse guru, GHG guru on social media. And so when Cattlemen's Conference in May of this year announced that they were going to bring him in as a keynoter, I got kind of giddy. I said, I get to talk to Mitlerner, and so that was fun. There's been so many cool people over the years. The one non-ag person that was really a lot of fun was Minnie Pearl.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Oh, wow.
And she was so real.
Yeah.
She was just down home and so nice and she said, "You look like somebody." She thought about it for a while, and I'm not even sure who she came up with.
Yeah.
And just that was a lot of fun that day.
Yeah.
And so you've been able to talk to a lot of different folks.
Yeah, one of a kind.
Been a good career.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the opportunity to have really talk to so many people on a regular basis on the radio. But the thing about radio, the thing about this medium here, really podcast as well, is it's a personal medium.
Yeah.
And so as long as you don't think that you're standing in front of a crowd of 5,000 and take that attitude, but instead that you and I are talking,
right,
and that translates into let's say at the other end is Keith Kissling or Brent.
Oh yeah,
and I'm talking to Keith. I'm actually having that conversation, and that's what people feel when they're sitting in their pickup truck or at home or the tractor or wherever it is. They they got the app up on their phone these days. It's still a personal communication, and so as long as you remember that, you can have a lot of success, I think.
Well, I remember that, starting in radio all those years ago, my dad telling me, just picture somebody on the other side of that wall and you're talking with them. And now when I'm on the tractor and I have the app or whatever I'm listening, I think that person is talking to me. And you're right, it comes across that way, and it's this form of media, and radio will always be the most intimate form because you are, like you said, talking to that person, and it matters.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think compared to even historically, the general public, non-ag people, non-rural people have gotten increasingly interested in agriculture. So how do you use medias like this to educate them, inform them, talk to them about things that are going on here? Because the only thing they hear is things that are on like Netflix, maybe Twitter, those kind of things. So they're hitting those social media influencers, Netflix, doing all those things, which are not typically both sides of the story. Where this is that other side of the story that that you have a chance to kind of talk to them, let them meet those. So how do you, somebody that's worked in this for years, use this type of media to get to the general public that isn't going to switch to the AM dial? They probably use this. My students don't even turn on the radio anymore whenever they get in the truck. So
right. Yeah, I think we're seeing that obviously, but I don't know. Down through the years, I thought that it was most important that we really try to do that. In other words, talking to agriculture, talking for agriculture. That I almost segregated it sometimes that because we always did custom reports usually for some of our bigger metro stations, the KTOKs of the world back in the day. KOKC now in Oklahoma City. We're on let's see, what's it? I forget the Tulsa station that we're on. Big Country. Over there, 99.5.
Yep.
Which happened to be on this list of radio stations.
Holy cow.
KHEN FM in Henrietta. That's the station now is in Tulsa back today. But I've always, I always kind of was a little more careful about talking about agriculture and really saying, hey, well, I'm the agricultural audience is going to hear this, but I'm also wanting the general public, the non-ag people, to hear that. Today, it's like almost you got to keep that in mind for the entire radio network, even the smaller stations. There's so many people in some of these smaller communities that they don't have a clue. They don't know what those guys are doing outside town limits. They're mad about something smelling bad, or they're mad about too much dirt in the air, or all that kind of stuff. So we try to I think always keep that in mind, that we are talking about agriculture to a much bigger audience than just a true farmer or rancher. And so I get fussed at a little bit by some farmers sometimes about, it's too general, or I need a little more specific information. I need to know about those. I need to know about the chinch bugs, that kind of stuff. And that's probably gravitated more to, we push them to our website. We push them to the email because we've got a crop update in that regard. Yeah. And so, that makes a difference. In other words, we try to educate them in as far as that general audience about, well, it's important that our farmers and ranchers have the tools they need, whether it's financial tools, whether it's production tools, whether it's things that are policy that are favorable to help them, succeed. All those kind of things. It makes a difference. It's a nonstop in that regard.
Yeah, because I remember the biggest example is, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, there was a piece on Dr. Phil talking about atrazine in drinking water, and that kind of thing. And the rural network, growers and farmers and all that, were talking about it on this media. Mm-hmm. But the housewives in Oklahoma City are getting it on this media. Mm-hmm. But they're not getting, like I said, they're not getting both sides of it. So it kind of segregates those population even more than they are, just due to landscape effects, just due to distance. It kind of says, it's us against them, because they're using these chemicals that are getting in our drinking water, and our kids are drinking it. That's what Dr. Phil said, and I watch Dr. Phil every day. But the farm network is talking about all these things that we're doing to do this, and it seems like it's more overlap needs to happen considering how many things, we talk about the American burying beetle and auxins a couple of years ago. We talk about private, the things that Senator Lucas talking about, all the foreign land ownership. I mean, that's people in downtown Oklahoma City don't even contemplate some of those things, and that's a big major issue, not only from a farming standpoint, but maybe potentially even a national security standpoint that could greatly impact things. So
it's it's an ongoing deal.
Yeah.
And we've I think most of your agricultural reporters, farm broadcasters have, we're unique. In other words, if you work for a agricultural publication, Farm Journal, or what are they? However, they've morphed these days to more online as well, a website as well. But they don't have a non-farm audience, and on those mediums, and even on their websites, by and large, a broadcaster does, and so that's always been at least on the minds. So you have to maybe simplify what we say a little bit. We have to be careful about not going over the line on technical stuff, because agriculture is so technical, and that's been the biggest challenge. I think a lot of our younger broadcasters that have come up in this thing, their minds are blown at some point about how much information you got to sift through every day. And I mean, because literally we do everything from production, the things that you guys were talking about at the start of the podcast, to policy, to trade, to Supreme Court decisions, the whole nine yards.
So I'm going to, I guess my one last question would be, so as we look at, Josh said it, we look at our students, or 20-somethings right now, who don't even turn on the AM, FM. How do you see that in the future? And I know you have impact or interaction with FFA and things like that. So is there, kind of a pointed effort, at least on the broadcast side, to reach that next generation, the 20-somethings that just, you ask them what AM is and they think it's the morning, and so is there kind of a concerted effort?
I think, I don't know if there's been a concerted effort or not. We can obviously reach them through some of the other things, the ways we touch things, whether it's social media, whether it's the email, to a lesser extent our website, but ones that are coming up through ag education and FFA. We do try to communicate to like ag teachers and those kind of folks of, hey, we've got some good information. Yep. If you're active in trying to get kids into the on the speaking circuit and those kind of things, you might want to get them to subscribe to our email. They can look at the headlines, they can find out in 10 seconds if they want to read a story or not that day, and that's probably the place it enters. But then some of them will gravitate over and say, hey, we'll listen. We'll listen to your podcast, or we'll listen. And depending on what they're doing. If they're out in the country, if they're out in areas that have got a good radio station that's really serving the community, they're more likely. What Dave was mentioning earlier, they're more likely to actually probably listen to that station, because they are talking about, they're the ones that are talking about the local city council or county sheriffs or these type of things, what they're doing. Nobody else is going to be doing that.
And I mean, most of
the newspapers are kaput these days. There's fewer and fewer actually doing anything local. So,
my last question is, how in the world? And I've tried this and I've failed, and I understand that. How in the world do you read markets? I mean, there's a science to it. You gotta go through hard red up two pennies and just roll down the whole list through wheat, through corn, through beans, through cattle on the rail, you know, all the way down carcass weight and all this. How in the world do you do that?
Practice.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not easy teaching people to do that.
And to squeeze it into like 30 seconds or however long you have in that break.
Yeah, our market reports on the radio network are it's a 2-minute package.
Okay.
Half of that's commercial.
Right.
So you got, in round numbers, 55 seconds to do all the futures. And we usually just on the shorter ones just do the futures.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're doing live cattle, feeder cattle. Sometimes we'll throw in lean hogs.
Yeah.
Hogs aren't really all that germane anymore as far as really the market impacting. But then hard red winter Kansas City wheat, which is now traded in Chicago. Soft wheat, corn, beans, cotton, crude, bye.
Right.
I mean, and it takes a little while to figure out. I mean, you know, it takes a person. The ones that quick, pick up quick, it'll take them a couple of months probably to really get smooth and get it down to the right time.
And you have a cadence, right? You've worked off a cadence, so you have a planned cadence.
It's kind of like an auctioneer.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. So and I think the thing that I've learned, the thing I've heard from farmers down through the years is, and the beauty of it is, along the way you're slipping in little things about, we're hard down because of the Russians and Ukraine breaking off their export deal. You got to throw that kind of stuff in there in the middle of all of that, because that little bit of commentary that you can offer. One of the reasons that a guy is still going to come back and watch that, because they can get all that on their phone.
Oh yeah.
But yet, if they know and respect you, and they trust that voice that they hear over the years on the local Weatherford station or the Enid station or Coffeyville, wherever it may be, or around the region, around the country, they're still going to stop and they're going to listen, and they know when those reports are on. And if they got somebody else in the cab, they may tell that kid, "Shut up." Right. I was told that when I was about 10 years old, back in the day. But and my grandfather told me that. But that's so important. And the other thing I've really preached to radio stations as we work with them. And you're always working with somebody new at the station.
Yeah.
It's always a lot of turnover.
Right.
New program director. And he thinks he's God's gift to radio and to the music industry. He wants to, why do we want to play another market report? Well, let's play another song instead.
Right.
But he said it's so important that if you've advertised and if you always had that thing at 45 minutes after the hour, you need to have it. Plus or minus a minute or so at 45 after the hour. And so because these guys, they know when they're supposed to come up, and they'll grumble if it doesn't.
Yeah.
So that was the most, because we used to have a farm show from 12:30 to 1 when I worked in the Delta, and it played almost on every radio channel. It was the country channel, it was AM, it was FM. Like basically everybody played that from 12:30 to 1, and he would call and he would ask for an interview. And it wasn't recording. He was just like, "I'm gonna call you back 10 minutes.
Wow.
You're gonna be live. You got 7 minutes." And then but I tell you what, the first time I did it, he just broke off. He just shut me down and ran off into his thing, because he had something else he had to do. Had to go into markets or had to next
play some commercial.
Like that. Yeah, you got
see Bagay, you wanted to sell something.
So that's the some of those folks that have been in the radio, it's a well-oiled machine, and there's no time for extra discussion.
A lot of these guys they're bigger than life. A lot of these broadcasters from down through the years. I mean, I've always been amazed at some of the people that I've known, and whether it's up in the Midwest, in Iowa, or in the Delta. A couple of guys over there. A guy named Jim Yancey was one of those guys that have been there for forever, ever. And I don't know how good of a broadcaster he was, but he was a marketer. He was a showman, and those kind of guys are just they're so unique.
Yeah,
that was my favorite thing. Is he did all his commercials.
Oh,
there
yeah.
was no commercials being played. His voice talked for 30 minutes in that show.
It only took 2 breaths.
He did all, if that.
That's right.
If that. He did every commercial.
And he had this timer right up here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, Ron, thank you so much for going on with us and spending some time, kind of recapping your career in.
You got a lot of editing to do. I know that.
I've done it before and I'll do it again. But thank you for going on with us and spending the time to, take a look at Oklahoma agricultural media throughout the years.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation of the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. And if you'd like to join in on the next discussion, just send us an email, podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, or send us a tweet. Our handle is reddirtag. We would like to thank Ron Hayes for joining us on the podcast today, and to find out more about him or any of our guests, along with any of the resources that we talk about on the podcast, visit reddirtagronomy.com. There you will find show notes, and you can listen to past episodes too. For Dr. Josh Lofton, Dr. Brian Arnell, Dr. Randy Taylor, I am Dave Deacon, and we all want to thank you for listening. The proceeding is a copyrighted recording of Agnow Media, LLC 2023. And yes, all rights are reserved.